G'day, it's Karl Thomson here from StorageCraft. Thank you for attending this webinar today. We'll be discussing the best practice for disaster recovery planning. So this is a webinar, everyone is on mute. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please type them in and I will review that at the end of the webinar, and we'll have some Q&A time for anyone that's got any questions on anything that we've talked about. So we are recording the webinar. It will be available on our StorageCraft APAC YouTube channel as well. Myself, I've been with StorageCraft for about 4.5 years and worked in the IT industry prior to that for previous 10 years and have a lot of experience with, particularly the Shadow Protect solution that we'll be talking a lot about today. So the first thing that I always like to start these sort of discussions with is actually understanding what the problem is. Why is business continuity planning so critical, and obviously how will best practice fit into that and what we should be doing? So the first thing is understanding where are the actual problems happening. We've got operational and application failures. This sort of 80% is much more likely to happen. This is, ransomware would sit across this, human error, Windows updates, changes to systems, upgrades, application configuration, that kind of thing. That's far more likely to happen than a hardware failure, particularly today, far less likely, particularly if you've got high availability or clustering and that kind of thing as well. Security, power, but even natural disasters. A natural disaster is just 3%. So what that really tells me is that, particularly when we start talking about cloud DR and offsite and DR locations separate to our primary production environment, is that 97% of the time we actually just want rapid recovery right back to where the machine was originally running. If we recover off-site, that may introduce complexities around networking and failover and failback and stuff. So obviously we can automate as much of that and make it as easy as possible, but we actually just want to rapidly recover. So when we're talking disaster recovery, we want to understand that there's a lot of different backup products out there, but how can we implement them to recover quickly? So some of the challenges people have with this is that 85% of critical systems are not backed up adequately. Now, fortunately with Shadow Protect, it's a full image of the system, which means when we restore that, we put the whole thing back as it was. There's no further recovery process that's required. Our backups all implement, best practice VSS backups, so that way they're in a consistent known state. So that's really important. The next challenge a lot of people face is data growth rate. So obviously data growth rate means a bunch of things, right? It's more storage for the primary storage, but also more secondary storage for that backup location. It's also taking longer to do backups. Now, fortunately with Shadow Protect, it does what's called real-time incremental sector tracking. So what this means is once we've done that full backup, we're tracking in real time the changes so that we don't have to go and interrogate a massive multi-terabyte system every time we want to do a backup. So we can deal with that challenge really well. Restores that fail up to 40%. So that's an alarming rate, and that really means that we need to be testing. And this falls into disaster recovery planning because the easiest way to test this is actually to perform recoveries. So we're going to show you how we can automate that process. We'll talk a bit about that, but also, how to best configure or design an infrastructure to leverage that. The other thing is ransomware. So obviously, as the rise in ransomware becomes such a major problem, this is superseding a lot of other best practices in terms of your recovery objectives, because this is more likely to happen. The size of your servers are now much larger, so the recovery time could take longer in traditional or legacy technologies. So this is all really important. I saw this one on my LinkedIn feed yesterday. A friend shared this one. A Perth-based company, data was hit and all their backups were compromised as well, and they didn't have off-site backup. And this particular bloke that shared this doesn't work in backup or DR anymore, but his comment was that everyone should have the 3-2-1 rule. So I actually thought about that today, and I thought, well, actually StorageCraft had quite a good blog article a while ago I saw talking about the 5 fundamentals of backup and business continuity planning. Protect data at every level, back up your backups, store backups in multiple locations, set logical recovery goals, and make data security a priority. So I actually just want to pull up this article. I'm going to reference this a little bit as we go through architecturally, some of the best things to do. But this one here particularly, back up your backups, you know, the 3-2-1 rule. So we'll talk a little bit about that, what your options are, particularly around the StorageCraft solution set. Obviously, protecting your data and, you know, in terms of security and stuff is, you know, obviously your first line of protection, and your backups might become your last line of protection. But these are all things that need to come into play. As part of that 3-2-1 rule, we'll talk about storing your backups in multiple locations. You want to set your recovery point and your recovery time objectives so that you know, particularly again, when you're talking large amount of data, if you're basing it around a traditional restore, that will take a long time. So understanding what those business needs are enables us to, you know, invest the appropriate infrastructure required to do a speedy recovery. And make data security a priority. So obviously that is again best practice. I've actually attached one of these guides already as a handout to this webinar, so I'll actually bring that up in a minute as well. So these are some good things to think about. Now, in terms of StorageCraft solution, particularly with Shadow Protect's offering, obviously starting with a reliable backup is really important. Having our included shadow control to centrally manage all of my machines and all of my customers, it's fully multi-tenancy. Off-site replication is a really important part, but the whole thing pivots on recovery. There's no point backing up if we can't recover, or particularly if we can't recover quickly. It might make those backups, you know, not that useful. And obviously with Shadow Protect across physical, virtual, Windows and Linux, and cloud-based recovery is a great solution that covers the board of these scenarios. Now, Shadow Protect SPX is our latest flagship version of our Shadow Protect, which has been around for well over a decade. The X now stands for cross-platform. So this has been out for a couple of years now, winning some amazing awards around our virtual boot instant recovery technology, and a fantastic solution that is complemented with our cloud-based disaster recovery as a service. So what this looks like is you've got the Shadow Protect agent that sits across on-site, your physical and virtual environments. It backs up to some storage on-site. Now this could be another disk, because we're a disk-to-disk backup. It could be a USB drive, could be a NAS, but ideally it might be a dedicated backup server. Now, by having a Windows box installed to receive these backups means we can run the free image manager software. This allows Shadow Protect to do what's called continuous incrementals, or what I'd say is incrementals forever. This is really cool because it means when we start looking at replicating off-site, we don't have to worry about these full backups happening every week or every month. We can deal with that really easily, and on top of that, we can have far greater retention. We don't have to get into all of this complicated dedupe and WAN optimization, all of that stuff. So Image Manager is a fantastic free tool that complements Shadow Protect. That would be installed on the backup server, and this is going to control a lot to do with what we're talking about today in terms of the backups. So the first thing Image Manager can do is verify consolidated retention. As part of verification, we have what's called Advanced Verify option, and when you turn that on, that will instantly virtual boot the backup every day, week, or month you choose. It takes a screenshot after a period of time for you to show you that the machines are successfully booting. So virtual boot's a great tool that could run on a backup server, is included free with Image Manager. But really the idea is if something went wrong in production, we can instantly virtual boot on this backup server to recover that backup. Now with virtual boot, it doesn't restore all of the data. It boots straight off the backup image. So it's a very quick way to recover a server of any size. Virtual boot also supports booting directly back into Hyper-V and VMware. So you don't have to have a dedicated backup server. We can leverage your existing production infrastructure. Another technology that is built in and now included free with Image Manager is called Head Start Restore. So as the backups come in, we pre-stage them into a standby Hyper-V or VMware environment, enabling us, instead of virtual boot, perhaps to rapidly cut over to a fully provisioned VM in a standby state. So that's another great option included. And as you'll see here, this at the moment is all focused around on-site recovery. The next step is leveraging Image Manager's built-in off-site replication. So we have the ability to replicate to the StorageCraft cloud for full DR as a service. You could go to your own remote site using our proprietary Shadow Control replication, or Shadow Stream, I should say, replication, or our included free intelligent FTP replication. So you can send it to your own data center or to your own remote DR site, or you could leverage the free S3 connector. So that way we can send a copy of our backups into S3 for archive. So we have a site disaster. the idea is in the StorageCraft cloud, log into a web page, single click of a policy, and we start booting up your entire infrastructure. If it's your own remote DR site, you've got your virtual boot or head start restore options. If it's an S3, that's more of your archive, not so much DR, but you could suck those images back out and perform a recovery with them as well. So that's the solution, giving you that type of coverage on-site and off-site. You need to think about the backup server. How can we build something that's running Hyper-V or the free Oracle VirtualBox? It could be a Windows PC. So I'll attach another handout in a minute that talks about different ways to design a backup server, if you will. Otherwise, again, if you've got production Hyper-V VMware environments, look at where those backups are sitting. You know, if they're on a USB drive, it's not really going to be the best way to recover quickly. If they're on a NAS, not a lot of NASs, you know, running at sort of Linux and the file sharing protocol, not the best for a virtual boot either, but a dedicated Windows server, you know, that's true SMB3, we're going to have the best performance. You know, particularly direct attached storage to that backup server is going to be an optimal place for a, you know, Hyper-V or Oracle VirtualBox recovery. Otherwise, VMware will boot directly over the SMB network, which is fantastic. So in terms of licensing, really all you need is to license the Shadow Protect software. So the original virtual machines, we can do socket-based, monthly subscription or perpetual licensing for physical and virtual machines. The image manager, the virtual boot, the head start restore is all included. Off-site replication to your own DR site is included as well as all of that technology you might like to run there in terms of virtual boot, head start restore, and shadow control. The StorageCraft Cloud is an add-on service, and S3 is an included connector, but you would have to obviously pay for that S3 storage, which I think is around 25 Aussie dollars a terabyte. So very affordable, giving you a copy of those backups for long-term archival. So in terms of that sort of 3-2-1 rule we looked at on the StorageCraft blog, what does that really mean? Let's dig into that. It means keep 3 copies of any data you can't afford to lose. So obviously the Shadow Protect images is a full image of the system. It's containing, you know, our business requirements, all of that data. So it says store on 2 storage mediums, hard drive and USB drive, a NAS and cloud server, etc. And 1 copy should be stored off-site. So let's look at this. Let's break this down and figure out what our options are. So number 1 is obviously your backup repository on site, the initial place where all the Shadow Protect images are going. Image Manager could be pushing that out into a standby virtual disk, so that's head start restore. That could be a second copy because it's extracting those backups into a separate DR environment, I guess. A third copy on site could be onto a fixed NAS or rotating USB drives or another Windows or Linux server on site. So any sort of SMB path or NAS or rotating USB drives. Now, what the cool thing here is that it's Image Manager pushing it out to 2 and 3. It's not another backup that's hampering my production server. My production server is just doing that 1 full image that it did at the start and then up to 96 backups a day, these tiny little increments. And Image Manager will deal with replicating copies of these backup chains wherever you want to go. So obviously that covers a couple of options. We then need to start looking at having a second copy off-site. So we've got the StorageCraft Cloud Services. Now, the key thing to understand here is that StorageCraft Cloud Services is very similar in a way to Head Start Restore. It is not another copy of the backup images, yet it's more of a recovery point that we can rapidly recover the server to. Obviously, you'll have some sort of lag window or retention point within that, but it's not giving us a complete copy of the backup chain. So that's why it's always good to have another copy of the backup chain rather than just in the initial on-site repository if you need to go back in time. So obviously replicating using included intelligent FTP to your own remote DR site or into a data center would be an option, or replicating to Amazon S3. So there's 6 different scenarios here. Obviously that could be extended with more USB drives or additional on-site storage, but there's a lot of different scenarios. We'll see some partners that replicate to their data center, and then Image Manager will replicate it to another data center to give them that extended copy and coverage or geographical redundancy. So there's a lot of different scenarios to think about, but obviously, you know, the last thing we want to happen is those Shadow Protect images to get hit. Now we're going to talk next about how we can secure that as best as possible, but part of that best practice is to replicate off-site. Now obviously the StorageCraft Cloud, it's not retaining the same copy or format of that backup images, but we can rapidly recover the machine within that retention, you know, period that you've defined. it would still be recommended to have a separate copy of that chain, whether it's offsite or on-site, allowing you to repair a backup chain and not perhaps have to take another full backup and start seeding that back to the cloud. So that's the kind of best practice. One should be on the right-hand side at a minimum, and 1 to 2 on-site, depending on where you're wanting your copies to be. So that's something to think about. Now, best practices for securing those backups. So we start off by saying you should encrypt your backups. So we want those backups encrypted. That is actually a requirement for the StorageCraft cloud. We'll only accept them if they are encrypted. But more importantly, if something was to get access to those images, they've got full access to all that data. So we want that encrypted, secured, so that no one can access the contents of those backups. What that doesn't mean is it doesn't mean something like ransomware can't go and encrypt it again or corrupt the files. So we need to secure the location. We want to protect the local network share that the backups are on. No user on the network should have access to that. It should be locked down to a user that image managers and Shadow Protector is authenticating directly to. And again, restrict that shared folder access as well. So the NTFS permissions of that folder, for example, to really secure that data. Review SMB, so obviously SMB version 1 on your network is there's known flaws there and vulnerabilities. So we want to lock that down and use offsite and cloud-based replication. So one of the cool things with Image Manager is it immediately verifies the backups. It then periodically re-verifies them. So it's constantly checking. It will only send stuff offsite once. Once it's been sent offsite, it will never try and send it again. And additionally, it will only send stuff once it's been verified as okay. So if my backups did get infected on site, Image Manager will not send or replicate that to the remote site. Now that's really important. There's a lot of replication technologies available, I guess. You could have NAS to NAS replication or third-party tools that replicate stuff to a remote site. But the risk is, what if those images get corrupted and that technology tries to send it to the secondary site? So Image Manager has that capability to prevent that type of problem from happening. It's a really great way to, basically isolate that remote site. It's authenticating into a separate FTP service or encrypted cloud. It's not vulnerable to a local compromise, SMB type attack. So I think that's really important as well. That second sort of offsite chain is totally independent from the primary one. So virtual boot, obviously from a disaster recovery perspective, this is one of the key ways to rapidly virtualize your backups. Regardless if it's 100 gig or 4 terabytes, we can instantly boot those backups using virtual boot. So we can boot directly into vSphere, directly into Hyper-V. So with vSphere, you require vCenter Server 6.0 Update 2 or newer. So you're going to need Essentials Plus or newer or greater licensing. So Essentials Plus, Standard, Enterprise, etc. all going to include the vCenter server along with the cluster requirement. For Hyper-V, it will boot into any Windows Server 2012 R2 with Hyper-V enabled, 2016 server, or Windows 10 Pro with the Hyper-V role. So it's a great way to leverage existing Hyper-V infrastructure or a Windows 10 PC or a Windows Server as a backup DR server, or with Oracle VirtualBox. It'll support older Windows servers, Linux machines, or other older Windows desktop operating systems as well, where Hyper-V might not be available. So really flexible. You could have a Windows PC with a mirrored, a couple of terabyte disks in it, and that could actually virtualize, a couple of machines if it had to. If it was an i7 with enough RAM, might virtual boot 1 or 2 servers for a small site. So it does really scale right down, and then obviously scales the other way when you start looking at much larger tier 1 hypervisor options. Great for testing, great for system recovery, great for migrations, no additional licensing required. So we've got thousands of people that use Shadow Protect, but are they designing it in a way that can leverage virtual boot would be the key question, is are you leveraging the best out of what you get with Shadow Protect? So the VMware Solutions is actually one of our best virtual boot technologies. We've certified at a very high level with VMware, where we've got a patented filter that sits in the vSphere framework and talks directly to the backup. So it's a really fantastic recovery experience because VMware boots directly off our image. It doesn't have to convert it through a secondary VM process or anything, which a lot of other products have to do. But this is also very similar to what we can do with Hyper-V in terms of Hyper-V and VirtualBox talk directly to the ShadowProtect backup. There's no conversion process or other VM required to recover. So some of the key things is obviously consistent sector-based backups. We're getting these VSS-aware backups at a sector level, meaning very fast, very small backups. This enables us to back up as frequent as every 15 minutes with zero impacts. It's not disrupting users, it's not stunning or pausing or hanging the VM because it's an in-gear snapshot. With virtual boot and head start restore, we can recover in minutes. Physical virtual support, image management for all the verification, automation, the replication is really a key part of that technology. And with Shadow Control, you've got centralized management. So on the back of the ShadowProtect backups, we've got the StorageCraft Cloud. This is the ability to replicate a copy of your backups to the StorageCraft Cloud in Australia. It has got 5 nines of uptime, 99.999. It's a very scaled architecture, fault tolerant, built specifically for disaster recovery. You can log in and customize different machines based on a service level, and obviously Cloud Premium is our full DR offering, and that allows you basically a single-click failover. So you can say, to these 5 servers, my domain controller must boot first, give that a few minutes, then start booting up my other servers, and that could scale to 20, 30, 50 servers. Very easily, you create a policy, a boot order, and you've got a single click. Now, a key part of that is around the advanced network options. So pre-configuring your VPN, IPsec, OpenVPN, port forwardings, DHCP reservations, public IP requests, all that kind of stuff is really powerful, enabling a comprehensive failover. And you've got all of that control yourself in the portal. You don't have to call anyone to invoke that DR, and you can test it at any time. One of the other key technologies that we have separate to ShadowProtect is our cloud backup for Office 365 and G Suite. This is a cloud-to-cloud solution where our portal connects directly over secure APIs to Office 365 or G Suite and securely backs up this data. It does it every 8 hours, so it's 3 times a day. And in that single portal, you can instantly search an entire tenant for your e-discovery, and within seconds restore granular recovery. So very powerful for email, SharePoint, contacts, calendar, OneDrive, rapid search because everything's indexed on the fly and the recovery takes just seconds. So that is a great solution that is just as well at risk of things like ransomware, because there's the risk that, bring your own device, people are at home, they're accessing SharePoint or OneDrive. There's a risk of things happening outside of the corporate network where we want rapid granular recovery of that data. Another solution that's actually come in relatively new to StorageCraft since actually January last year is OneBlocks. This gives us the ability to scale out primary and secondary storage. It's basically a NAS chassis that has enterprise features like DGIP, compression, encryption, and replication. You put your own disks into it, so I'm not charging a premium on disks. You can mix and match different SATA SAS drives. And this has a lot of cool stuff built in too. So one of the things I really like is the CDP, the continuous data protection. What this will do is the appliance itself will do snapshots every 10 seconds for the first hour. Those snapshots are immutable. It then changes to minute, then hourly and daily, etc. And what this enables us to do is even on our backup images, we could have a very short retention, but we could actually have storage level snapshots that can't be infected. It's entirely immutable. But this is also great to offload, your primary file services directly onto the storage. It includes its own snapshotting for that backup process, and it frees up the storage on your SAN. And the great thing with OneBlocks is it's entirely scale out. So as you add a new disk in or add a new chassis, it just extends that overall storage in seconds. So another great solution. So just before I finish up, let's just see how I'm going for time. We've kind of got a few minutes left. So what I'm going to do is just add in, I've got the handout there for the ransomware if you all want to grab that. I'm just going to go in and add in another handout here, and it will be called Backup Disaster Recovery Appliance Flyer. So I'm just uploading that one now to the webinar handouts. This is a great document that helps you sort of understand maybe particularly for the smaller customers, a good, affordable way to build an effective backup and disaster recovery server. But I think those are the two sort of key things I wanted to leave you with today. If anyone's got any questions, I will answer that now. You'll all get an email with a copy of the recording. It will also be on our StorageCraft APAC YouTube channel. And yeah, thanks again for attending this webinar today. Hopefully it's given you some good ideas and best practice on what you should be doing with your backups and understanding how we can recover quickly and leveraging the tools that are there. Don't see any questions coming through just now, so I'll just give you another minute. If anyone's got anything they want to ask or see, I'm happy to bring up a live demo environment if anyone would like to see anything we've talked about. But again, thank you. Again, my name's Karl Thomson. I'm a sales engineer currently based in New Zealand, looking after our APAC region. All right, I'm going to end it there today. Thank you again.